I'm Doomsvince, and this is day 149 of Spawnia.
Yesterday, I wondered who the next slimy cardboard cutout baddie to get his own story would be in Curse of the Spawn, but the next arc, mercifully going for a little variety, stays away from Spawn's present-day supporting cast and, like the angry video game nerd, takes us back to the past. The book opened with a story about a Spawn far in the future, so since these are just a bunch of extra side stories that don't seem allowed to have any real bearing at all on the main title, gee, you think various factions trying to recruit Spawn to their side might help him make those tough choices about his identity and his future if he, were allowed to know about it? It only stands to reason that McElroy would resort to going all the way back to antiquity to tell the origin of the first Hellspawn. Don't get me wrong, that could be a great premise, and this universe already has a long history of exploring Hellspawns of different historical periods, starting with the medieval Spawn. But after reading so much Spawn, patterns have started emerging, and a big one is mythos seeded by other writers that McFarlane chooses to ignore completely. And not just mythos, sometimes even totally straightforward events. McFarlane has a co-writer in the main title now, but before that, the last time he let another writer do a story totally without him was when Alan Moore wrote the first Freak story, way back in issue 37, and I've already described example after example of McFarlane's complete disregard for the contributions of other creators to his work. So it's difficult not to see all this world building is useless, because chances are later stories will contradict it. Who knows if McFarlane even read these stories? He should have. He seems to think he was creatively involved enough to answer letters in the curse words column. Really, Todd? You couldn't let the guy writing the book have his own letters page? You need two? Sure, occasionally a letter is addressed to McElroy and he'll answer it, but by and large, McFarlane uses this as spillover from his own letters column. I'm glad he didn't try that with Sam and Twitch. Dear Mr. McFarlane, please take writing courses from Mr. Brian Michael Bendis. I think your stories will vastly improve. Okay, I'm being unfair. I really did like Spawn number 76. Just as this world has been doing since really the beginning, McElroy is trying to incorporate ancient mythology in and around the biblically inspired eternal heaven versus hell struggle. We've seen a lot of Dante in Alan Moore's vision of hell, which has more or less retained its original aesthetic, and there have been bits and pieces of other myths and legends blended together. Here, McElroy goes further than ever before and presents the world of the Greek gods circa 2000 BC pretty much lifted right out of my high school epic tradition textbook. Zeus rules with Hera from Olympus, Hades rules the underworld, Tartarus is beyond that, and McElroy uses everything from the gods' betrayal of the Titans to Zeus's incestuous nature. And I'm sure it's exactly the year 2000 BC because folks were pretty jazzed about the new millennium in 1998. Now, how can the Greek gods exist simultaneously with heaven and hell, you might ask? It turns out that hell is the darkest realm of all, and it's even further beneath the earth than Tartarus. Nobody seems to know about it except Nyx, the personification of night. The first Hellspawn is created there out of the vengeance of the Titans, who seek to overthrow Zeus. I like the idea that there's some truth and validity to different religions and mythologies, that they can all somehow exist simultaneously to differing degrees. The idea that somehow the Greek pantheon of gods could exist with the biblical monotheistic god isn't something I can recall seeing explored before, and I'm hoping to see that come to the forefront in this story. I can't help but wonder, though, about Norse and other pantheons as well. Hell is somewhat explained, but there's nothing yet about heaven, and I wonder if McElroy will think to build the fallen angels into this, since we know from recent stories that there really is one original Satan. Perhaps when Nyx, the personification of night, is describing hell, she's not aware of its true origins. The big question for me is, were all the gods with a lowercase g created by God with a capital G? Since they're all personifications or explanations of why everything in nature exists, how do we still have all those things when the gods disappear? I'm assuming that, if they were still around, it seems like they'd show up along with demons and angels in present continuity. I'm hoping for some good, solid explanation about how both mythologies exist at the same time. So a kid who's raised by centaurs gets plucked up by hell and turned into the first Spawn. All we know about him is he has warrior training, and he's really sad he didn't get to grow up before he got tragically transformed into a monster. Things must have worked differently back then. He didn't make a deal with the devil or even die first, as far as I can tell. He barely looks human anymore. He looks like a flying shark infested with worms with a bunch of tentacles with alien faces sticking out. First those curse robots again last issue, then these little furry terrors, now tentacles. Dwayne Turner loves these creepy smiley monsters without eyeballs. Must be an image thing. It was in vogue 4,000 years ago in this universe. You're right, Hades, nothing changes. Regardless of whether McFarlane will ever acknowledge or contradict this, it's enjoyable as its own tale so far. Turner's art is gorgeous, and I found it easy to get swept up in this bizarre ancient world, both foreign and familiar. I know a lot of this mythology, but Turner's visual interpretation gives it a unique tone all its own, and blending it with the Hellspawn stuff gives it a fresh and intriguing spin. I especially like the amphibious look of Medusa, with her fish-like face and webbed fingers. There's a haunting wonder to this issue I found captivating. The style is in danger of outshining the story, which is set up well but could broach on nonsense pretty easily. I don't know yet why this guy had the Titans and Medusa so interested in him before he became Spawn, but there's mention of a prophecy, 'cause you can't not have one of those. So I wouldn't be surprised if once again there was no better reason it's this guy than it was foretold to be this guy. It ends on a satisfying cliffhanger. Medusa wants to marry Spawn and overthrow Zeus, who is arrogant and overconfident, just as I always remembered him, and I'm certainly compelled to read on. Well, now I'm off to read more letters by McFarlane in a book he has zilch to do with. Signed, Captain Logan.